I was in the middle of scrolling through my phone when the power went out. Not just the lights, everything. The hum of the refrigerator died, the Wi-Fi dropped, and the TV screen went black. For a moment, the house was silent, save for the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. Then, my mom's voice broke the stillness.
Elliot, come here now.
Her tone sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the usual, come help me with the groceries kind of call. This was urgent, almost panicked. I dropped my phone on the couch and hurried to the kitchen where my mom stood by the window, her face pale. My younger brother, Liam, was already there, clutching the edge of the counter like it was the only thing keeping him upright. "What's going on?" I asked, my voice shaky.
Look,
My mom said, pointing out the window. I stepped closer, my heart pounding. Outside, the street was dark. No street lights, no porch lights, nothing. But that wasn't what caught my attention. It was the sky. Or rather, what was in the sky. A thick, swirling mass of clouds had gathered overhead, moving in a way that didn't seem natural. They churned and twisted, almost like they were alive. And in the center of it all, a single faint light pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat. "What the hell is that?" I whispered.
I don't know,
My mom said.
but it's not normal. I tried calling your dad, but my phone's dead. No signal, nothing.
I pulled out my own phone and checked. No bars, no Wi-Fi. Just a blank screen with the time frozen at 9:47 p.m. I glanced at the clock on the wall. It still ticked, but the hands hadn't moved. It was stuck at the same time. "Mom, the clock," I started, but she cut me off.
I know, it's not just the clock. Everything's stopped. The microwave, the stove, and even the car won't start. It's like time itself is stuck.
Liam let out a small whimper, and my mom pulled him closer, her arm around his shoulders. I could feel the fear radiating off both of them, and it only made my own anxiety worse. I didn't know what was happening, but I knew it wasn't good. Then, the TV turned on. We all jumped at the sudden burst of static. The screen flickered, showing nothing but gray snow at first, but then a figure began to emerge. It was a man sitting at a desk, his face partially obscured by the distortion. His voice crackled through the speakers, broken and disjointed.
"Stay inside. Do not look at the sky. Cover. Windows."
"What is he saying?" Liam asked, his voice trembling.
Shh,
My mom said, leaning closer to the TV.
listen.
The man's voice became clearer, though it still had an eerie, metallic quality to it.
"This is not a test. Repeat, this is not a test. Stay inside your homes. Do not look at the sky. Cover all windows and doors. Do not attempt to leave. The situation is contained."
"Contained?" I repeated. "What does that mean? Contained how?" The man on the TV didn't answer. Instead, he leaned forward, his face coming into focus for the first time. His eyes were wide, almost frantic, and his skin had a sickly, grayish hue. He looked like he hadn't slept in days.
"Do not look at the sky.
He said again, his voice dropping to a whisper.
They are watching."
Then, the screen went black. For a moment, none of us moved. We just stood there, staring at the blank TV, trying to process what we'd just heard. My mind raced with questions, but before I could voice any of them, a loud thud came from outside. We all turned toward the window. The street was still dark, but I could see movement now, shadows shifting in the distance, too fast to make out clearly. My mom grabbed my arm, her grip tight.
Elliot, close the curtains. Now.
I didn't argue. I yanked the curtains shut, plunging the kitchen into darkness. My mom did the same with the other windows, her hands shaking as she fumbled with the fabric. Liam stayed close to her, his eyes wide with fear. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper.
We wait.
My mom said.
We stay inside and we wait for whatever this is to pass.
But I wasn't so sure it would. The man on the TV had said the situation was contained, but something about the way he'd said it made me think it wasn't under control at all. And then there was the sky, those swirling clouds, that pulsing light. It felt like something was coming, something we couldn't stop. I glanced at the clock again. Still 9:47. Time wasn't just stuck. It was waiting. The house felt like a tomb. With the curtains drawn and the power out, the only light came from the faint glow of my phone screen. I kept checking it, hoping for a signal, but it was useless. My mom had lit a few candles, their flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. Liam sat on the floor, hugging his knees, his eyes darting toward the windows every few seconds. "Do you think Dad's okay?" he asked, his voice small.
I'm sure he's fine.
My mom said, though her tone didn't sound convincing.
He's probably stuck at work trying to figure out what's going on.
I didn't say anything. My dad worked late shifts at the hospital, and if the power was out everywhere, he'd be dealing with a lot more than just a blackout. But I didn't want to scare Liam any more than he already was. The silence was unbearable. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind outside made me jump. I kept thinking about the man on the TV, his hollow eyes, his trembling voice. They are watching. What did that mean? Who were they? I couldn't shake the feeling that something was out there, just beyond the walls of our house, waiting, watching.
Elliot,
My mom said, breaking the silence.
can you check the basement? Make sure the door's locked.
I nodded, glad for something to do. I grabbed one of the candles and made my way to the basement door, the flame casting eerie shadows on the walls as I walked. The door was at the end of the hallway, and as I reached for the handle, I hesitated. The air felt colder here, like the temperature had dropped a few degrees. I turned the handle and pushed the door open, holding the candle out in front of me. The basement stairs were steep and narrow, disappearing into darkness. I took a deep breath and started down, the wood creaking under my weight. The basement was cluttered with boxes and old furniture, the air thick with dust. I scanned the room, making sure everything was as it should be. The small window near the ceiling was covered with a piece of plywood. My dad had put it up years ago after a storm broke the glass. I checked the lock on the door, then turned to head back upstairs. That's when I heard it. A faint tapping sound coming from the window. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The tapping came again, slow and deliberate, like someone or something was trying to get my attention. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. I turned toward the window, holding the candle up to the plywood. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then, a low, guttural growl echoed through the basement, so deep it made the floor vibrate. I stumbled back, nearly dropping the candle, and bolted up the stairs, slamming the door shut behind me.
Elliot,
My mom called from the kitchen.
are you okay?
"Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Everything's fine." But it wasn't. Something was down there. Something that shouldn't be. I rejoined my mom and Liam in the kitchen, my hands still shaking. My mom gave me a worried look, but didn't press me for details. I didn't want to tell her what I'd heard. Not yet. Maybe it was just my imagination, I told myself. Maybe the stress was getting to me. But deep down, I knew better. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, the candles burning lower and lower. Liam eventually fell asleep, his head resting on my mom's shoulder. I kept glancing at the clock, hoping the hands would move, but they stayed frozen at 9:47. Then, the TV turned on again. We all jumped, the sudden burst of static shattering the silence. The screen flickered, and the man from before reappeared, his face even more gaunt than before. His eyes were bloodshot, his skin almost translucent.
Do not look at the sky.
He said, his voice crackling.
They are everywhere. They are watching.
The screen flickered again, and for a split second, I saw something behind him. A shadowy figure, tall and thin, with elongated limbs and a face that was more void than features. Then, the screen went black. "What the hell was that?" I whispered. My mom didn't answer. She was staring at the TV, her face pale. Liam stirred in his sleep, but he didn't wake up. I got up and walked to the window, pulling the curtain back just enough to peek outside. The street was still dark, but the swirling clouds in the sky were brighter now, the pulsing light growing stronger. And then I saw them. Shadows. Dozens of them, moving through the darkness. They were tall and thin, just like the figure on the TV, their movements jerky and unnatural. They didn't walk, they glided, their forms shifting and twisting as they moved. My breath caught in my throat as one of them stopped and turned toward the house. Its face was blank, featureless, but I could feel its gaze on me, watching. I dropped the curtain and backed away, my heart racing. "Mom," I said, my voice trembling. "We need to leave, now,"
We can't.
she said.
You heard what he said. We have to stay inside.
"But they're out there, they're—" Before I could finish, a loud bang came from the front door. We all froze, staring at the door as the sound echoed through the house. Then it came again, louder this time, like something was trying to break in.
Get back.
My mom said, her voice low. She grabbed a knife from the drawer and stood in front of Liam, her eyes fixed on the door. The banging continued, each strike harder than the last. The door shook in its frame, the wood splintering. I could hear something on the other side, a low, guttural growl, just like the one in the basement. And then the door burst open. The door slammed against the wall with a deafening crash, and for a moment, everything was still. The air felt heavy, charged with an unnatural energy. My mom tightened her grip on the knife, her knuckles white, while Liam woke with a start, his eyes wide with terror. The doorway was empty. No shadowy figures, no monstrous creatures, just the dark, gaping maw of the open door leading into the night. The wind howled outside, carrying with it a faint, metallic smell that made my stomach churn. I took a step forward, peering into the darkness, but there was nothing there. Just the empty street and the swirling, pulsing sky.
Close it.
My mom whispered, her voice barely audible over the wind.
Close the door, Elliot.
I moved toward the door, my heart pounding in my chest. The wood was splintered where the lock had been, and the hinges groaned as I pushed it shut. I fumbled with the broken lock, trying to secure it as best I could, but it was useless. The door wouldn't stay closed. "We need something to block it," I said, turning to my mom. "A chair, a table, anything." She nodded, her eyes darting around the room.
Liam, help me with the couch.
Liam scrambled to his feet, and together they dragged the heavy couch toward the door. I grabbed a chair from the kitchen and wedged it under the doorknob, hoping it would hold. It wasn't much, but it was better than nothing. As we worked, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The shadows outside seemed to press against the windows, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke. I kept expecting one of them to break through, to reach inside and drag us out into the night. When the door was as secure as we could make it, we retreated to the kitchen, our backs against the wall. My mom still held the knife, her eyes fixed on the door. Liam clung to her side, his face pale and drawn. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice trembling.
We wait.
My mom said.
We stay quiet and we wait for whatever this is to pass.
But I wasn't sure it would. The man on the TV had said the situation was contained, but it didn't feel that way. It felt like whatever was out there was closing in, like we were trapped in a nightmare with no way out. The minutes dragged on, each one feeling like an eternity. The candles were burning low, their flickering light casting long shadows on the walls. I kept glancing at the clock, hoping the hands would move, but they were still frozen at 9:47. Then, the tapping started again. It was faint at first, barely audible over the sound of the wind, but it grew louder, more insistent, coming from all around us. The windows, the walls, even the ceiling. It was like something was trying to get in, probing for a weakness.
Don't look.
My mom said, her voice tight.
Don't make a sound.
I clenched my fists, trying to steady my breathing. The tapping was relentless, each strike sending a jolt of fear through me. I could feel the walls vibrating, the sound echoing in my skull. And then, it stopped. The sudden silence was almost worse. My ears rang with the absence of sound, and the air felt heavier than ever. I glanced at my mom, but she didn't move. Her eyes were fixed on the door, her grip on the knife unyielding. That's when I heard it. A voice. It was faint, barely more than a whisper, but it was there. A low, guttural sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was mocking, taunting, like it knew we were trapped. "Do you hear that?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. My mom nodded, her face pale.
Don't listen to it. Whatever it is, don't listen.
But it was impossible not to. The voice grew louder, more insistent, weaving its way into my thoughts. It wasn't speaking English, it wasn't speaking any language I recognized, but somehow I understood it. It was calling to me, urging me to look, to see, to know. I felt a strange pull, like an invisible hand tugging at my mind. My eyes drifted toward the window, toward the faint glow of the pulsing light outside. I didn't want to look, but I couldn't help myself. The voice was too strong, too compelling.
Elliot, no.
My mom hissed, grabbing my arm. But it was too late. I pulled back the curtain just enough to see outside. The street was empty, but the sky was alive. The swirling clouds had formed into a massive, swirling vortex, the pulsing light at its center growing brighter with each beat. And in that light, I saw them. Figures. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing in the street. They were tall and thin, their forms shifting and twisting like smoke. Their faces were blank, featureless, but I could feel their gaze on me, watching. And then, one of them turned its head. Its face wasn't blank anymore. It had eyes, hollow, glowing eyes that burnt with an otherworldly light. It stared at me, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me. The voice in my head grew louder, more urgent, filling my mind with images I couldn't understand. Images of darkness, of endless voids, of things that shouldn't exist. I stumbled back, pulling the curtain shut. My mom grabbed my shoulders, her face filled with fear.
What did you see?
She asked, her voice trembling. I couldn't answer. My mind was reeling, my thoughts jumbled and chaotic. The voice was still there, whispering in my ear, urging me to look again. But I couldn't. I wouldn't. "We need to get out of here," I said, my voice shaking. "We can't stay. They're coming." My mom didn't argue. She grabbed Liam's hand and nodded toward the back door.
The car. If we can get to the car, we can drive somewhere safe.
But as we moved toward the door, the tapping started again, louder this time, more frantic. The walls shook, the floor vibrating beneath our feet. And then the voice returned, louder and more insistent than ever. It wasn't just in my head anymore. It was everywhere. The voice was deafening now, a cacophony of whispers and growls that seemed to come from every direction at once. It wasn't just one voice anymore. It was dozens, maybe hundreds, all speaking in unison, their words overlapping and twisting into a chaotic symphony of sound. I clapped my hands over my ears, but it didn't help. The voices were inside my head, burrowing into my thoughts, filling me with a sense of dread so profound it made my knees buckle.
Move!
My mom shouted, her voice barely audible over the noise. She grabbed Liam's hand and pulled him toward the back door, her other hand still clutching the knife. I stumbled after them, my legs feeling like they were made of lead. The back door led to the garage, where my dad's old SUV was parked. My mom fumbled with the keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely fit the key into the lock. The tapping was everywhere now, on the walls, the ceiling, the windows. It was like the house itself was alive, trying to keep us trapped inside. Finally, the door swung open and we rushed into the garage. The air was colder here, the darkness almost suffocating. My mom hit the button to open the garage door, but nothing happened. The power was still out.
Elliot, help me!
She said, grabbing the manual release handle. I ran to her side, and together we pulled, straining against the weight of the door. It creaked and groaned, but slowly it began to rise. The moment the door was open, the voices stopped. The sudden silence was almost as jarring as the noise had been. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and uneven, and the sound of Liam's quiet sobs. My mom didn't waste any time. She shoved the keys into my hand and pushed me toward the driver's seat.
You're driving.
She said.
I'll take care of Liam.
I didn't argue. I climbed into the driver's seat, my hands trembling as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered, then roared to life. The headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty street ahead.
Go.
My mom said, her voice tight.
Just go.
I slammed my foot on the gas, and the SUV lurched forward, tires screeching as we sped down the driveway. The street was deserted, the houses dark and silent. The swirling vortex in the sky was brighter now, the pulsing light casting an eerie glow over everything. I could still feel the weight of those hollow eyes on me, watching, waiting. Where are we going? I asked, my voice shaking.
I don't know.
My mom said.
Just drive, get us out of here.
I turned onto the main road, the SUV's headlights cutting through the darkness. The streets were empty, the traffic lights dark. It was like the entire town had been abandoned. The only sound was the hum of the engine and the occasional gust of wind. But then, I saw them. Shadows, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, standing in the middle of the road. They were tall and thin, their forms shifting and twisting like smoke. Their faces were blank, featureless, but I could feel their gaze on me, watching.
Elliot, don't stop!
My mom shouted. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and pressed down on the gas. The SUV surged forward, the engine roaring as we barreled toward the figures. For a moment, I thought they would move, that they would scatter like smoke in the wind. But they didn't. We hit them. The impact was jarring, but there was no sound, no crunch of metal, no shattering of glass. It was like driving through a thick fog, the figures dissolving into nothingness as we passed through them. But the moment we were clear, the voices returned, louder and more insistent than ever. "They're still here!" Liam screamed, his voice filled with panic. "They're still here!" I glanced in the rearview mirror and saw them, the shadows following us. They moved faster than anything I'd ever seen, their forms shifting and twisting as they glided over the pavement. They were gaining on us.
Faster!
My mom shouted.
Go faster!
I pressed the gas pedal to the floor, the SUV's engine screaming in protest. The speedometer climbed higher and higher, but it didn't matter. The shadows were still there, still gaining. And then, the road ended. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the SUV skidded to a halt. The road ahead was gone, replaced by a massive chasm that stretched as far as the eye could see. The ground was jagged and broken, like the earth had been torn apart. The swirling vortex in the sky was directly above us, the pulsing light so bright it hurt to look at. "What do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mom didn't answer. She was staring out the window, her face pale. Liam was crying, his sobs echoing through the car. The shadows were closing in, their forms shifting and twisting as they surrounded us, and then the voice spoke. It wasn't in my head this time. It was outside, coming from the shadows. It was deep and guttural, filled with a malice that made my blood run cold.
"You cannot escape,"
it said.
"You belong to us now."
The voice echoed around us, its words sinking into my mind like a poison. The shadows closed in, their forms shifting and writhing, their hollow eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. I could feel their presence pressing against the car, like a weight crushing down on us.
Elliot, we have to move.
My mom shouted, her voice breaking through the haze of fear.
We can't stay here.
I glanced at the chasm in front of us, the jagged edges of the earth glowing faintly in the light of the swirling vortex above. There was no way to drive across it, no bridge, no path, nothing. The shadows were closing in from behind, their forms twisting and contorting as they reached for the car. "There's nowhere to go," I said, my voice rising in panic.
Then we run.
My mom said, her eyes wild with desperation.
We can't just sit here and wait for them to take us.
She threw open her door and grabbed Liam's hand, pulling him out of the car. I hesitated for a moment, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, but then I saw the shadows closing in. They were almost on us. I scrambled out of the car, my legs trembling as I hit the ground. The air was thick with the metallic smell I'd noticed earlier, and the pulsing light from the vortex above cast everything in an eerie, unnatural glow. My mom was already running, dragging Liam behind her, her knife still clutched in her free hand. I followed, my heart pounding in my chest. The ground was uneven, the jagged edges of the chasm cutting into my shoes as I ran. The shadows were right behind us, their forms shifting and twisting as they glided over the broken earth. I could hear their voices now, a low, guttural chant that seemed to reverberate through the air.
"You cannot escape. You belong to us now."
I pushed myself harder, my lungs burning as I tried to keep up with my mom and Liam. The chasm stretched out in front of us, seemingly endless, but there was no other way to go. The shadows were everywhere, closing in from all sides, and then I saw it. A bridge, or what was left of one. It was old and crumbling, the wood splintered and cracked, but it stretched across the chasm, leading to the other side. My mom saw it too and veered toward it, her grip on Liam's hand tightening. I sprinted after them, my legs screaming in protest. The bridge was narrow, the wood creaking under our weight as we stepped onto it. The shadows followed, their forms shifting and twisting as they glided onto the bridge behind us.
Don't look back.
My mom said, her voice tight with fear.
Just keep moving.
I focused on the other side of the chasm, my eyes fixed on the faint outline of the land ahead. The bridge groaned and swayed under our weight, the wood splintering with every step. I could feel the shadows closing in, their presence like a cold hand on the back of my neck. And then, the bridge began to collapse. The wood cracked and splintered, the planks falling away into the chasm below. My mom screamed, pulling Liam closer as the bridge gave way beneath us. I lunged forward, grabbing onto the edge of the bridge as it crumbled, my fingers digging into the splintered wood.
Elliot!
My mom shouted, her voice filled with panic. I pulled myself up, my arms trembling with the effort, and scrambled onto the solid ground on the other side. My mom and Liam were already there, their faces pale and drawn. The shadows were still on the other side of the chasm, their forms shifting and writhing as they reached for us. but they couldn't cross. The chasm was too wide, the bridge gone. The shadows lingered on the edge, their hollow eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, but they couldn't reach us. For a moment, we just stood there, staring at the shadows on the other side. The swirling vortex above us pulsed with light, the air thick with the metallic smell. My mom pulled Liam close, her arms wrapped around him, her knife still clutched in her hand. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice trembling. My mom didn't answer. She just stared at the shadows, her face pale and drawn. The chanting grew louder, more insistent, and I could feel the weight of their gaze on me. And then, the voice spoke again.
You cannot escape,
It said.
you belong to us now.